We recorded this sister session long before Harry and Meghan's baby was due, and I still wanted to share it with you guys, so I hope you enjoyed this video clip. Hi, my name is Chinyere Osuji. I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Rutgers University-Camden, and I wrote this excellent book, as you can see here, called Boundaries of Love, Interracial Marriage, and the Meaning of Race. And I have a friend that we're going to talk to today.
Hi, I am Tamara Walker, and I teach Latin American history at the University of Toronto. My book is on my bookcase, but it's not displayed in the way that yours is. So I'll remember to do that next time.
You should do it all the time, so you never have to move it.
And I noticed that on TV shows, like on MSNBC, everyone who has gone there that has a book or has a friend who's had a book out, they always have them on display. So I should know better, but I'll know better for next time.
I know. How do you know?
Yeah. Now we know.
Cool. So, we've got some questions that we prepared today. Well, I've got some questions. Do you have questions too?
Same. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we've got some questions that we're going to ask each other about this whole Harry and Meghan situation. I feel like I'm the host here, even though I didn't mean to be the host.
But we'll alternate those roles. It's okay.
Okay. I'm like, we're here today to discuss. Okay. So, I want to just ask you, first of all, just in general, what do you think about this whole situation?
Oh, I have so many thoughts. Because I've been following since, I don't know how long you've been following them, but I was following on the wedding day, and I read a lot of, unfortunately, I read a lot of British tabloids, the Daily Mail in particular. So I followed the coverage that Oprah was talking about, and it was clear from day one or the day after their wedding that it was really racist, and kind of tracked all of that coverage and tracked them when they made their announcement, and had been really excited about the Oprah interview. It was like the Super Bowl for me. I think I told you that. So.
That's right. Okay, got you.
Yeah. So what about you?
So I paid attention when they got married, and since then it's on occasion, whatever they do makes the headlines, and I'm like, oh, look at that, and then I go back to my life. I haven't been really paying a lot of attention to them, but I definitely, and I missed the live airing of the Oprah interview. I wanted to watch it, work stuff took over, but then I watched it the next day. I was looking on Twitter, where can I watch the interview?
Because part of the experience was watching it live, right, and getting the live Twitter coverage, and I was in various text threads talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the interview was still the interview.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So let me ask you, okay, and that one question. If you were to summarize the interview in one word, what would that word be?
Stunning. And that's because it, usually with these interviews, they give up the goods pretty early when they're promoting it. And so there had been all of these clips of it on CBS, and there were a couple of bombshells, which I don't even remember, but I went into the interview thinking okay, well, we've already heard the big stuff, but there were so many twists and turns and bombshells dropped that it really over delivered on its promise. And so there were several moments where it really was stunning, just hearing the things that Meghan was saying and that Harry was saying, and just keeping with the Super Bowl analogy, when I heard Harry say that his dad had stopped taking his calls, I gasped, and my husband was like, did they go into overtime? So it really did. Yeah, what's your one word descriptor? And then I have some other questions.
Naive. I'll be
on both their parts, on her part?
Her and him, yeah, both of them. But especially her, because I feel like you should have known better.
Why?
Well, we live in the United States, which was created, through a Revolutionary War in which we cast off, the yoke of our, colonizers, which were who? The British. And I was just like, okay, so this history of our own country. And that even though, enslaved Africans were brought here before the British arrived, they played a central role in bringing, enslaved Africans to this country. And that's your own history. And yet somehow you thought that you would expect equal treatment as a woman of color in the royal family. And the whole way she talked about the Commonwealth, they talked about the Commonwealth when we go to the Commonwealth. I'm like, do you not know what the Commonwealth is? I was flabbergasted, but I was like, oh girl, you just don't know. You don't know. And I was like, didn't she go to Northwestern? She went to a good school too. But like, I guess, it just goes to show like you can get any quality education at any university.
But aren't there worse things than being naive? I think that a lot of us go into situations, prepared for the worst but hoping for the best. And it kind of sounds like that's what she was doing.
Yeah.
That she, knew what time it was, knew who these people were, but also knew that she loved this man and that he was going to do as much as he could to shield her from some of the harsher realities, and that the family itself would be a little better than they proved themselves to be. And so I don't think she thought that it was going to be easy. I think she thought that her outward facing role as the first member of color in this family was going to be something that the royal family was going to see as really valuable and important, especially because she was always dazzling people wherever she went as soon as she got there, basically. So I think she thought that that was going to be such a big part of her experience that it would maybe overshadow the other uglier parts. And I think she didn't expect the parts that were ugly to be so ugly. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, honestly. Like, there's been so much, and we can talk more about the coverage of the interview, but I do think that some of that coverage has been kind of focused on whether she should have been surprised and why she wasn't kind of surprised by what was happening. And again, I don't think it's that she was shocked, but she was hurt. And I think people are allowed to be hurt
Absolutely.
and offended. And I think that was what was so beautiful about Oprah's reaction in the moments, because she was also not surprised by what she was hearing. I think some of that was kind of the performance for the camera, but I do think that she was outraged on her behalf. And sometimes that's what people want, right? When they're sharing their experiences and their hardships, like they don't necessarily want someone to just give them a blank stare, like, oh, that's not surprising.
I mean,
then that's not
I would never have done that. And like, let me be fair.
Yeah,
like, I interviewed I did over 100 interviews with people who are in Black white couples in LA and Rio de Janeiro, hence the book. And I did not like when I was asking them questions about their experiences with racism and like families and whatnot. I wasn't like, didn't you know? Like that's not nice, It's not kind. And also like you have to give grace to people who are willing to even share their lives with you, right? You have to respect that. And so as the outsider to the interview, watching it as a third party, it's like, oh, girlfriend, didn't you know that? But like if I had been the interviewee or interviewer, I definitely would have been like, girl, how come you didn't know? That's completely different. And it would have been disrespectful. But like, she's not here, so I can say this.
This is bringing us to my question for you, because since you are a sociologist and you have spent a lot of time interviewing people, I know it's a different context, but were there questions that Oprah did not ask that you wish she had, and that if you had had the chance to sit across from her, you would have asked?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let me think. What could I have asked? What would I have asked? I would have asked her to describe her identity as a biracial Black woman. What does that mean to you? Because I also see that, like, so somebody who's studied a little bit, who's dabbled a bit in this idea of like biracial identities, and like I think about the work of like David Brunsma, Carrie Ann Rockamore, who's shown that like this thing that we call like a Black-white biracial identity like has many like different ways that it manifests itself. Like some people can be like, I'm Black, I'm biracial, but I'm just Black, like maybe a Barack Obama type. And you can also have people who are like, I'm biracial, and that means both Black and white. And then you can also have people who are like, there's a lot of different like configurations, and I can't remember all of them right now. But I was wondering, like, to me, given how she was talking about the situation, it made me feel as though like even though her mom is Black and her dad is white, or was white, I think he passed away recently. I feel like she might be one of those people who are like, I'm just biracial type, and doesn't see herself as like a Barack Obama type, or like I'm Black. Does So I feel like that might be tied to understandings of race. And sorry, sociologists, I should be well versed in this literature, but I suspect that that's tied to how she's understanding her life as a racialized woman.
Yeah, that's intriguing. And by the way, her dad is alive. So when she said that she lost her dad, it was because he had betrayed her in the British tabloid media, because he was always too happy to interview with them and to hand over letters that she had written him and to basically sell her out. So she was
Mhm.
basically responding to the fact that he had betrayed her. But I think you're right. And that there's something about the way she, I think, has always positioned herself. And maybe it has to do with the fact that she was an actress before, and already it's so complicated to be Black or biracial or actress of color in Hollywood. And for those who are somewhat ethnically ambiguous, it's probably in their interest to kind of say nothing and just let people decide for you kind of where they see you. That was something that Vin Diesel and who's the other guy? There's
Rock.
another guy. Yeah, exactly. That they do really well, right? That they have their sense of how they identify, but that's not always something that they lead with. And instead, it's basically like, well, where do you see me, and what kind of roles do you see me in? Although on Suits, which I didn't watch but I know about, she was also playing a biracial character, but in that case, her dad was Black and her mom was white, and her dad was being played by Wendell Pierce. But I think that would be a really interesting window onto what she was expecting, right? How she saw herself and what she was expecting. And, I do think there's something to the biracial identity that probably made her feel like she would be able to enter in this and not have, an easy path, but a somewhat easier path than if she had two Black parents or just been darker skinned and had curly or kinky hair. I think that would have been something that she may have, or that would have had a different kind of level of preparation for her for what she was going into. And
Mhm.
so maybe she thought, based on her own life experiences up until that point, that it was going to kind of smooth the way for her in a way that wouldn't be true for, you and I.
Mhm.
And so maybe that's also part of what makes it something more complicated than her being kind of unprepared for what she was getting into. Maybe she was prepared in a way that she had been prepared, just looking the way she did throughout her life.
Mhm. I also think that California is a little different from the rest of the country. And so like I see in the media they keep saying, "Oh, she's a Black woman, she's a Black woman, she's a Black woman." And I'm just like, would she actually say that about herself? Because I feel like living in LA and like just having some like friends who are biracial, like more than I had in the past, and just like being some more familiarized with just multiracial families and whatnot. It seemed to me as though like somebody like her who looks like her, like some people would call her a light-skinned Black woman. I don't even think that that's what I would refer to her as. Because I think of her as like a biracial woman. Because in California, that has like a particular understanding, a particular meaning that doesn't necessarily equate in other areas of the country. So I feel like people like her, and like if she'd grown up in Chicago, she probably would have identified as Black, and or like Black but biracial. I just wonder like if she grew up in California and had that. Remember when Rashida Jones was interviewed and like somebody made like this passing reference to her being white or something, and she's like, "I'm ethnic," or I think they said like, "You have a really nice tan," and she's like, "I'm ethnic."
You look like you just come off like an island or something. You're very tan, very tropical. I mean, I'm ethnic. Me too. So
Oh,
And I feel
wow.
like that's the kind of world that Meghan Markle is probably in, like where she could just be
Mm-hmm.
this like ethnic woman. It's like not white, ethnically, racially ambiguous. We don't know, but like her,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and then like of course you got like what kind of like background is it? What kind of biracial is it? She could probably pass as like Italian in some circles, or like as people might assume that she's Jewish in others. I saw a picture of her when she was younger, just today, in which she's with her mother when she was a little girl, and she has this this fro. Because she's with her mom, they're like, oh yeah, of course she has hair like that. But if she didn't, if she was in that same picture with her father, people would probably be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, hmm, like, oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because when she first came on the scene, because I hadn't watched Suits and hadn't followed her blog, I was like, she looks a lot like Kate, like the same hair, the same body type, or somewhat similar body types. And so I think that was also really interesting, that she was so visually similar to Kate, but was also being treated as though she looked like me, like I think and that's kind of been a lot of what people have been joking about since the interview, that like, when they were talking about how Archie would have looked when he was born, and like the conversations and concerns about his skin color, people are acting like he was going to look like Bernie Mac, right? Like just this assumption. And so I do think that's what's been interesting, right? That she probably hadn't ever been treated in that way before, right? And been reminded of being Black as far as they're concerned, right? Not biracial, not something else, but just Black, because it seems like that's ultimately what she was kind of running up against, the sense that it didn't matter what the particular parentage was, that as far as they were concerned, she was Black.
Do you think she realizes that she was not going to be queen? Because I asked this because it seems to me like throughout the interview she kept comparing herself to Kate. Like, well, they treat Kate this way, and like we all saw it, right? A lot of us like saw the comparisons on like social media. We're like, oh, Kate holds her belly, and they're like, oh, how cute, and then she holds her belly, like she's showing off her pregnancy, right? And on the one hand, I was like, oh yeah, that's clear racism, obviously, right? On the other hand, no. In addition, I was also thinking, well, also they have to love Kate. She's going to be their queen eventually, one day. And so there's going to be people who are the royalists, or people who are like, even like just a little ambivalent, who don't really care, but like have a little respect for the monarchy. I mean, I don't think that she would have gotten the same treatment, even if she had been like, just like Kate, a rich white girl from England. She's not going to be queen.
I see. Yeah, that's a good question, because at first I thought you were asking if she understood that the order of succession.
Know that?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. No, but I like that question, that it's also about kind of the game that the tabloid media were playing, and that Kate was always going to be the one to come out on top because she is gonna be queen. I don't think she expected that she would be the foil for Kate, right? That like it's one thing to prop Kate up and to always say, she's doing this amazing thing amazingly well and so perfectly. And it's another to be like, unlike this horrible, manipulator, Meghan, Kate doesn't think about those kinds of things, right? Like, I think she would have been okay if she had just been treated with ambivalence. And maybe, and she had said something in another interview, I think before they made their announcement about stepping down as senior royals, that she never expected it to be fawning coverage, but she did expect it to be fair coverage, so that she would be criticized for the things that she had like rightly done to warrant criticism, but not to have things like her avocado toast is fueling war and famine, and that she is trying to make people feel bad by cradling her own belly, right? And just being used in that way. She made Kate cry, right? And that taps into all kinds of ugly stuff. So I think that was something that she was not prepared for, just how often she would be the person that kind of served Kate's interest and served Kate being propped up in that way. But it is interesting to kind of think about what non-racist coverage of her would have looked like, even if it wasn't positive, right?
So maybe I'm too old, because like I remember the coverage of Diana, and I remember just being like, ooh, they're saying some really mean things about this girl, and it's like, wait, but didn't Charles like cheat on her? But yeah, they're painting her as the perpetrator. Okay, but I live on this side of the pond, so it's like, oh, that's so interesting. Keep it moving, And I also remember them always talking about Fergie. Do you remember Fergie? And I feel like she was in a similar position, where you had this beautiful, elegant, thin Diana, who has this eating disorder, and then you've got the Duchess of Pork, as they called her, right? And so I don't know if even they put them side by side as like overtly, because I don't remember, but I wonder if like that's kind of the similar thing that they're doing now. It's just like, or instead of, it's a different stigmatized category. It's not obesity or weight. It's now, Blackness. That's the foil, as you put it. I remember those days. I was like, ooh, that's so mean. That's just a pork?
Yeah. And they didn't have much else to go on, right? Because she, always looked impeccable.
Yeah.
And she always was so poised and well-spoken, and like held her head up high, just thinking about the things about Diana, where she was always kind of meek. And she didn't seem to kind of set a wrong foot forward, right? And the Queen seemed to be, at least from outward appearances, although, you know, you have to question those, welcoming of her and inclusive of her. So it seemed like that was a thing they found to go with, that angle, just her being fundamentally ill suited, right? Like she was always going to be wrong because of how she looked and because of her family. Although I remember just being kind of relieved that the that the most embarrassing sides of her family were the white sides of her family, because it seems like that would have been
Right.
even more, they would have done even more racist stuff.
They would have.
So
They would have. And even like her just having a mom, like being raised by a single mom, they're like, oh, like straight out of Compton, you know? It's like
yeah,
she's like straight out of like next to Beverly Hills or something, you know? Like
yeah,
straight out of
yeah,
Bel Air,
exactly.
but they're like, oh yeah, straight out of Compton. It's like if she had really been from Compton, it would have been so much worse. It would have been
Yeah,
so much
yeah,
worse.
yeah. And if her family had behaved in ways that triggered for them the stereotypes, then it would have been worse, right? Her mom had no choice but to keep really quiet. And what a relief it was, right? That she did maintain that kind of dignified silence. And also, you know, how good it was for their relationship that her mom didn't betray her in the way that her
Yeah.
dad did.
Oh my God. So
Um,
why do I have this idea in my head that her father like died of a heart attack?
well, he had a heart attack, or, you know,
That was
was
his reason for not being able to
treatment.
attend the wedding. But
Exactly,
then I thought he had
exactly.
another heart attack and then he's like actually gone. But it
Yeah,
sounds like you're saying no, 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 he's still there. She's just like, I'm done with you. Like
yeah, yeah. And I'm kind of a truther about the fact that I don't think he had a heart attack. I think that was his way of saving
not
face
having to
and
go.
seeming, yeah, and like also getting some sympathy after having posed for all of these embarrassing photos before the wedding and just like handed over the letters and just been such a horror show of a person. So I think it made him vulnerable in a way that served him. And it kind of did, because then people were like, and she also didn't check on her father when he was hospitalized. Like it
Really?
just created another
Oh wow,
narrative.
people did that? That's so funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was really
Yeah.
gross.
Check on her phone
Um,
while he's like playing golf.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, so have you been following any of the coverage of the interview, like on Twitter, outside of Twitter? Because we are a week out from it and people are still talking about it. And you know, I read the Daily Mail and they have article after article after article about it. So they just won't shut up about it. But I wonder if you've encountered any of the
I
stories.
have just a little bit, the whole Piers Morgan thing where his co-host was like Megan cut you off.
That was
Oh,
amazing.
so funny. He's like, I mean, you talk so much smack. And this is my like, you talk so much smack about Meghan Markle. She decided she didn't want you in her life anymore. And yet you still keep talking about her. And he just like got up and like left. Like, I'm done. Oh, but you knew he was telling the truth, right?
So
Like,
not a lie was detected. Yeah. And that he can't let it go. And what was interesting about that moment was that he stormed off, right? He's like, I can't take this. But this is the same person who wanted Meghan and Harry to like sit in England and take all of the negative attention, just this like onslaught of horrible racist headlines, and
really?
just take their
That's been his
lumps.
position?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's been the you know, the author of these headlines because he writes a lot for the Daily Mail and he has this, you know, this breakfast program. And so he has also then called them whiners, and you know, that they blindsided the Queen, that they abandoned their duty. And it does seem that either he, you know, wanted her to die, right, to like find some way to follow through on what she was talking about in the interview, or to just sit there and take it and just, I guess, become a shell of a person. And the fact that he couldn't even in that kind of 30-second moment sit there and take someone gently and professionally and respectfully criticizing him, I think was just the ultimate irony. Well, and I was trying to kind of figure out how to bring this part up because it's somewhat related, but not really, which is the fact that, you know, when Meghan was talking about the senior members of the royal family raising concerns about how dark her son would be, the response in the media was like, well, and especially in the British tabloid media, they were like, well, by not naming the person, she has cast blame over the whole royal family. and she should have named the person. And one is that, if she had named the person, they would have said, well, that person, and let's be real, Charles or William, was not there to defend himself.
Right. There would have been another reason for why we can dismiss that claim. Or why it
Exactly.
was wrong for her to even mention it.
Exactly. And then they would have found reasons based on whether it was him or William to explain it away, right? Like, well, maybe he was just asking as a grandfather or as a brother. So that's also kind of a bad faith critique. But it also means, and I was thinking about this because of what you were saying about, okay, that's not going to end white supremacy, that it takes the burden off of the person who said it to step forward. Like, if you're so concerned about the family and the stain it's going to put on the family as a whole and the institution as a whole, then you as that person could be like, listen, I said that, and I am so beyond embarrassed for having said it, and I will do better, and do, like, that would have been if they love the family and the institution and the country so much, and they're so worried about the stain that this can cast on them, then that would have been a good moment, and it would have been a moment of leadership and a moment of reckoning, like all that stuff, right? But instead, because that's not the interest, right? Like, instead it's more about kind of shouting down the person who is talking about being offended and hurt and attacked by this, instead of the thing that was actually said.
Oh my gosh. So like they needed to hire really good like diversity and inclusion like consultants, because what they actually did was a complete disaster. Did you see when like Prince William and Kate were like walking with their winter coats on in frigid England, and they had this sister, this African girl wearing Ankara print, freezing her tail off because she didn't have a coat. They were like, oh, look at this black girl. See, we have black people that are, our employees. And you see her just like walking like this because she's cold. And it's just like, oh my God, you want to be like, we have black friends. Look at our black friends. It's like, I know that's not your friend. We all know you're the royal family. You don't have black friends. Like, don't even pretend. Just don't. And that's what I would have told if they'd hired me as their diversity, expert. I've been like, okay, don't even do that. Make the statement that you said, or just say, we have a lot. The multiracial families is new for us, and we are, trying our best to, navigate the situation. And we love Meghan, and we love, Archie, and of course we love Harry, and we're going to figure this out together as a family. Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
What you don't do is like show all of your pictures, your newsreel of images of you with all of your black constituents. Look, this is us in the colonies. This is us in the former colonies. This is us with our wait staff.
They conditioned us to think of it that way, though, because of the visit that Prince Charles made to that community center where people were getting the COVID vaccine. And it was very clearly intended to say, look, I am not afraid to be right in the same room as a black person.
I mean, and in fact, it just like confirms everything Meghan said, because like, especially as people of color, especially black people, were like, oh yeah, that's exactly the classic move that white people do when you accuse them of racism. Like, look, I'm not racist, and then show all their photos of themselves with the black people in their lives whose names they don't even know,
Right.
But they're somehow friends, like, oh yeah, I got lots of friends. Like the janitor where I work, I say hi to him all the time. It's like, that is not your friend.
And also, people act one way when, like, say we believe, I mean, not that photo, but say we believe people when they say like their friends are black. They act another way when it's about their family.
So what do you think about Archie and the whole like thing about whitening? Like, I feel like in America we don't have this language of like people becoming white because we have this one drop rule, right? And whereas for me, I see somebody like Archie and I'm like, oh, he would be somebody who would like get most of the privileges of whiteness, like just not even thinking about his class privilege, because of course that's off the chain, but like off the charts, but like just thinking about his racial privileges, despite having a mother who's like black and white, like you look at him, he's like, he's a white baby, What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, if he was born and raised in Brazil, right, would people think of him as anything other than white? I mean, they also have so much more language to describe racially mixed people than we do in the US, especially in 2021. I think there's some old-fashioned terminology that we used like in the 19th and early 20th century to describe racially mixed people, like octoroon, which is, I guess,
would it be a quadroon?
he'd be a quadroon, right? And so, and like people don't use that, and for good reason, because those were often derogatory terms.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like so much of the identity is formed in a U.S. context, and that will continue to be the case, assuming they stay in the U.S., right? That he'll be formed in a U.S. context and identify according to the logic of the U.S. context. And I think some of that also has to do with Meghan herself, right? And her connection to her mom. So however vaguely or imprecisely she identifies, like she very obviously has a Black mom who's going to be Archie's, grandmother and a presence in his life. There is a difference between presenting very obviously as Black and the treatment that comes along with that versus someone who will probably, I mean, he's a famous kid and he'll be a famous young adult. So people will know that his mom is Meghan Markle. But for another kid who looked like him with the same kind of racial makeup, he would probably have to tell people that he was of African descent before people would necessarily think that. And it goes back to your point about Meghan Markle also being someone who could be any number of things, not just a biracial Black woman. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting, especially considering that he's growing up in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, like, these things change. Who knows? Like, maybe in like 20 years, I don't know how old he is now, but like in 20 years when he has to like mark something off on the census, he might have a completely different way to identify himself from the way that we talk about race today. If we even still do. Like, isn't that kind of the work that we're doing now to try to like dismantle racism and white supremacy so that these things aren't issues or things that we have to think about? I mean, 20 years is not that long, but like,
yeah,
if we're here, I don't know.
Even as we're dismantling racism, we're not dismantling racial identity, right? Because people often think of that as really important and meaningful. I think it makes white people uncomfortable to think about that, even though they themselves have a racial identity. But for Black people to talk about and embrace a racial identity, and for other groups to talk about and embrace racial identities, I think that's always going to be the case, right? Because we also have cultural identities that are tied to our racial identity, so we shouldn't have to do away with that. It also gets me thinking about just being in Canada during all of this, because there's a term here in Canada that I've always found so weird. Have you heard racialized?
I've heard, I mean, of course, I'm a sociologist. Like racialized minorities or racialized persons, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And so that's how Canadians refer to people of color, as racialized people.
But they're racialized too.
Right. Like white people are also racialized,
Absolutely.
right? And
yeah.
It's just so odd to me because it describes people in ways that make racial identity seem like a burden, like a thing that was imposed upon them.
So I think it's important to distinguish between like a Black ethnic identity, versus like a Black racial identity, because the whole construct of race is really about, it's set up in juxtaposition to whiteness as far as who gets to be free, who doesn't, who gets to be like killed by cops, who doesn't, right? Or like even like who gets to have a language around that. And so I think that race itself is something that needs to be abolished. I think that you're right in the sense that we don't want to take away our ethnic identities. Like, I love being like a Nigerian American, like Black American, American, Igbo, girl.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you're proud also of your ethnic, background and heritage.
Yeah.
So it's not about stripping that away, but it's definitely about like getting rid of whiteness and like this thing called Blackness and this thing like without erasing our heritage and our ancestry and the things that matter to us.
Yeah. No, that was beautifully said. That was better than I could have said it. And there are, corners of the internet where people are like, why do you care about the monarchy? Like, as Americans, like, why do we care about what's happening or what happened in England? And like, why is this such a topic? And it's been a topic of conversation for the past week, right? Like and even longer than that, because like the British press was making such a stink about it when it was announced, and then they continue to, and we've kind of picked up where they left off in terms of covering it in the US and in Canada. So like, what do you say to the people who are like, why do you care so much about that?
I mean, they came here. They brought their trash over over here. They could have stayed in Canada. They could have stayed where you are, Tamara, and left that mess there. But no. What did they do? They came and brought all that drama to us. So now we got to deal with that. I mean, part of me is like, honestly, part of me is like, screw the royal family. They owe me reparations on multiple levels. You know, like I'm Nigerians. It's like, oh yeah, like you created this country/company called Nigeria. Like, yeah, I'm owed reparations. And like, they're the British monarchs. I'm like, F them. We got rid of them hundreds of years ago. We don't want anything to do with them. But we're still a former colony. Let's face it. Like, there's a bit of a colonial mindset in which having a British accent immediately means that you sound smarter, even though you can be just as dumb as the next dude, right? The next bloke. You know? It doesn't matter. But like, you can like be like a poor working class guy who like never read a book in his life, and you come to America and be like, oh wow, you sound so smart. Oh my god, I love your accent. It's like, yeah, because we have a colonized mindset. So I think that's a large part of it. You know, we don't acknowledge it. We don't talk about it. I think in other countries like, you know, the Americas, like this, you know, south of the border, like they recognize that they are post-colonial societies much more than we do in the United States. So we've been like, freer longer, I think. Now we have that thing we call a special relationship.
Right.
Where we're not a member of the Commonwealth, but we have a special issue because we're the colonized who've now become the colonizers, right? What about you? What do you think? Do you care?
I care.
Well, obviously you care because you're in the Daily Mail.
I know.
Well, how do you answer that question? Like, why do we care? Like, we got rid of them in 1776.
Well, I think a lot of people care about Meghan's experience because in some ways it reminds them in different ways of their own experiences. And there's been that kind of coverage, you know, a lot of Black women talking about just those microaggressions or being gaslit. And, you know, people in interracial relationships feel some sense of connection to it. So there's a lot to kind of pull from. And I do think, and this isn't something that people have really touched on, that I've become really interested in. Like the British media were posting all these pictures of Harry being really happy hanging out with William and Kate, like when they were, when William and Kate were first married and Harry hadn't met or gotten married to Meghan. And it was like, oh, you know, they had such a special relationship, a special bond. And, you know, he was like a brother to her and she was like a sister to him, and like how horrible that Meghan came between that relationship. And I think what is interesting is that both of those things are probably true, that like they really were super close and she was really supportive of him, but that bringing this Black woman into the dynamic revealed a different side of her that he would never have seen had she not come into the family. And so it's also kind of seeing people for who they also are, right? Not necessarily for who they really are, but for who they also are.
And I'm gonna leave. I'm like, how could you not know? This is the British royal family. They owned everybody. The sun never set on the, you know, British Empire, right? It's like, what you, so now we refer to the, you know, post-colonial territories as the Commonwealth, and all the people of color there's a Commonwealth, but it's like, but like, how do you think you got money? How do you think you got rich? But anyway,
I don't think these are the smartest people.
They're not.
You know?
Okay, granted. I mean, Harry was a military guy, right? Like, he didn't go to college. He went to high school, I think, some sort of boarding school. And they're not trained to think critically. They're trained to become members of the royal family. But they weren't able to connect the dots. Fine. I expect that of the royal family. But you're right that, like, we've all had those Meghan situations where white people have said really weird, awkward things to us that have made us realize that, oh, they don't see me as an equal. But like, when she was talking about wanting to die, I felt so bad for her. Like, I remember there's a scholar who wrote about her almost dying of misogynoir. I think that's exactly what happened. Like, she almost killed herself, because these people treated her so badly.
And I think that expression of vulnerability is really important because of the narrative of strong Black women, because it becomes a description and a cudgel where it's like, well, you're strong and therefore you should be able to take these things. And no one should, right? Like no one should be
Oh.
subjected within their own family and in their own home to what she experienced, even if she should have expected it, right? Because should you really expect to have your humanity denied and to have your unborn child treated like a novelty, like a curiosity in a cabinet? Like, I think those things are shocking because they should be. Like, these people are throwbacks in all the worst ways, right?
Almost sounds to me like you're saying like we should continue to be surprised and shocked when things like that do happen. That would actually be a bad thing if we're just like, oh yeah, we know how those things happen. Like I'm like here saying like, oh she's so naive, but it sounds like you're saying like we should never be like we should never expect that type of treatment because we don't deserve that kind of treatment.
We don't deserve it. And I think if only for the person who's telling their story, like for their benefit, to just be outraged on their behalf and to honor their truth and their feelings and their hurt, because that was clearly her truth, right? And she truly was hurt.
Yeah. And she's like so beautiful. Watching the interview, like her eyes are just like so like just like her big doe eyes, her mother's eyes she has. And the whole time I was like, look what they did to my Meghan. What they did to my Meghan. Meghan, tell me who was it? Who was it? I'll go get him, you know?
Yeah, and she's super earnest, right? Which I mean
yeah,
that part did make me laugh, like the Little Mermaid analogies that she was making. Like she's like a super earnest person. And so that also made it unsurprising that she was so hurt, right? Like, and again, anyone would be hurt, but I also think that she's an especially earnest person, and that's why it's also kind of hard to hear.
Whereas me, I was like, oh, she was a little mermaid. Oh, they took her. I totally ate it up. I ate it up. Like, okay, so I got two questions, like two in one actually, and then like those are my last ones. The first one is like, do you notice how Oprah kept saying, "Why do you think that is? Why do you think that happened? What do you think was the motivation? Like, why do you think that happened? What was that?" And I felt like Meghan was like avoiding using the word race, and that it wasn't until Oprah said the word race and first Oprah said it, and then Meghan's like, yes, I think that's what it was. And then Harry said it. I talked about racism, and then all of a sudden she said it. And at first I was like, wow, this shame on her, like she can't even name it. And I was like, wait. Or was that being strategic? Or she's like, oh my God, I know that everybody will be mad at me if I use the words first, so I let Oprah say it first.
I think it's the latter. Yeah, I think it's the latter. And I think that for Black people in general, right, and especially the person it happens to, there's such a fine line to walk, because people are quick to say, well, you're crying racism, or you're playing the race card, even though in her case it was so obvious, right? And so I think she probably had to be really strategic to kind of lay out the case, and that Oprah was doing that with the series of questions that she was answering or asking, and that Meghan was answering. I think that they had to kind of build up to that, even though they could have opened with that, where it's like, let's talk about the racism.
Yeah, here we go. Question one.
Right.
Well, you gotta build up to it, so keep people watching.
It kind of seemed to play out like a court case.
Or it's like developing. Let's roll out. Okay.
But it's like, why does it require that, right? Like exhibits A through Z, and like this carefully constructed argument.
Because it's like good television.
No, it's good television, but it does kind of say that the burden is pretty high of talking about racism, where they could have just opened with that as a given, but it did have to be kind of carefully constructed. And I think for the dummies in the audience who weren't there, to kind of take them there and to take them along, especially for people who are just like, what? It's the British royal family. They're great. Diana, commemorative plates. Like, I think there are people who have those associations with the British royal family, like Buckingham Palace, like tea sets, pomp and ceremony. Like, it probably needed to be laid out that way.
I also think it makes for good television, because like CBS has to get their commercials out. They got to have that ad revenue, so they got to like lengthen it out. Like, don't say everything at the very beginning. That's what the trailers and the teasers are for. But do you think Oprah believed her? Some part of me is like, I think that Oprah was like, I know this girl's she's giving me a story. And I feel like she wasn't like, oh yeah, I believe everything she's saying happened the way it happened. I almost feel like she's very reserved, like,
I think there were parts of the story that Oprah found hard to believe, like the part about not having Googled him or read her own press, because she made that comment at one point, and she's like, well, since you don't read anything.
Yeah. That was like her little, like, since you don't read anything.
Yeah. So
But you
I
can't
think
do that on your own show when you're like interviewing, when you're trying to
Right.
get kind to your interviewee. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess that was like one kind of window onto how she was feeling, or maybe it was not necessarily a reflection of how she felt, but about how the audience would respond. Because even when she was like asking Harry, like, what do you mean you felt trapped? Like, how could someone like you, like, I think she was asking these questions because the audience was going to have the same kind of pushback. Like, how could this celebrity who also used to have a blog and was very like much online not have,
I didn't know this.
yeah, she had a whole lifestyle blog, right? So she was like an internet person and an internet savvy. You know, like I think she was behind the Sussex Royal Instagram when that was going on, and they were really good at it, right? And it was like much more popular than the Cambridge Instagram. So I think she's a savvy person, and so that part is a little hard to believe. But I can also believe a self-absorbed actress not really Googling.
Yeah.
You know,
forget
and
the actors and like how artists are, and they're self-absorbed people. Like she's in.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he's a celebrity in Britain, whatever. I'm a celebrity in the U.S.
I'm a celebrity in Canada. So that's gotta be on par. And she does seem to be very self-assured, and like she's so poised and so well-spoken. And I'm sure that also meant that she was not easily intimidated. She seems pretty unflappable, and so that probably also explained why she was just like, I'll be fine, because she probably had been for a lot of her life. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that Oprah believed everything. I think she was like really, really sympathetic to them and supportive of them ultimately, even if she wasn't 100% on board with their narrative. I think she took it seriously enough, and I don't think she would put her name on the line in that way if she didn't believe them to some degree, or think that they at least believe their truth, and that they were able to kind of answer the trickier questions or the thornier questions. But what do you think?
I think that I agree with you. I think that Oprah has particular faces when she's like, I know that you're giving me a little bit of BS, but I'm gonna let this keep going. Her eyes get really small. She like goes back, It's like,
yeah, we've got all the memes, right?
Yeah, all of the memes, like
yeah.
But it's like it's a thing she does. It's not like a oh my gosh, it's like a. And this is what I really like about being a sociologist. Like we can separate like the individual people, like the Queen Mother, whatever. Well, she's passed, but like the Queen Elizabeth and like Prince Charles. We can separate that from the monarchy, right? And even like I love that Meghan kept referring to the firm, like you got that royal family, then you got the institution behind the royal family that's maintaining their image to keep them essentially to keep them going, because England is not an absolute monarchy, right? We have to be aware that like a revolution, anything can happen. The problem might be like one day, you know what, we're done. We don't need a monarchy. Let's get rid of them. Off with their heads, and God forbid, right? But like, we don't need these fools in Buckingham Palace. We could just have the palace and just like kick them out, right? Like that could happen at any moment. I think that's part of why the royal family didn't push back against the tabloids. Because like they're very much aware that they have to cater to the tabloids. They have to give them access to them. They have to be kind to the tabloids, because the tabloids could turn on a dime on them and be like, you know what, the royal family, they're trash. We don't need them. And then what would happen? They're trying to maintain themselves, and like the people in the firm are trying to stay employed. The royal family, they want to keep their homes. And could you imagine like Prince Charles trying to get a job? Could you imagine? Could you imagine them stripping away all of their wealth and like, no, we're gonna give this back to the British people and like invest in education and like find a job, Queen Elizabeth. She'd be in a retirement home. Could you imagine with her crown?
And people treating her like she's crazy if she's like, I used to be queen. Right?
Because the reality is Europe has probably like got loads of people like that all around, right? Who like used to be in these royal families and now they don't have the royal family anymore. They got rid of their monarchy. And it's like, oh yeah, that lady, she's Princess so-and-so. But like, look at her like hanging out in New York City. Like she's not like on her throne. She's like, hey, I'd like some fries with that.
Right.
Anyways, all this to say that they have to maintain themselves as an institution because what institutions do.
Because it seems like British people are so offended by the interview. And I can't figure out why. Like there's the whole like, well, you know, with Philip in hospital, and it's like, well, he's 100 years old. So it just seems like there's this widespread sense of offense to everything she says and kind of stands for. Like what do you think that's about?
How people identify with the royal family. Remember, she's the American. She ain't British. Mm-hmm. So people are probably like, who is this friggin' American girl telling us about our people? Yeah, I think there's a bit of nationalism happening there and a little bit of xenophobia.
And that's why I thought of it, because you were saying that, you know, she was so intentional about distinguishing between the royal family and the firm and the institution. And yet British people seem to conflate all of those things and then include being British with all of that.
Because she's not British. Yeah.
Yeah. And like not Black Brits, you know, and Brits of color, and I think they're kind of among the few people who aren't taking offense and taking this so personally. But I have seen so many slippages between, like, she says that the royal family was racist, but British people aren't racist. And it's like, well, she wasn't saying that about British people, right? And so there just seems to be this, like, she's talking about the royal family, she's talking about British people. But maybe there's also something else there, because I do think that ultimately white Brits and maybe white Americans don't see anything fundamentally wrong with inherited status. And so to criticize the royal family is to also kind of criticize the notion of inherited status and inherited privilege. And I don't think people are comfortable with that. And so maybe that's why they conflate those things and then take them so personally, because it would call into question a lot of what the societies that we all live in are built on. This idea that your status is determined by things other than your own merit and work.
I don't think so. I disagree with you there. I think that's a very American thing. Like, Brits are very much conversant in discussions of class. They're very much like aware of like people's, like, even so much, remember, like, they'll hear your accent and be like, oh, you're from this class, you're from this neighborhood in London, right? Like, they're very conversant, they're very like fluent in this language of class in a way that Americans aren't. So I would imagine that thinking about inherited privilege is something that the Brits are used to, whereas we are not. What I think is also happening is that the Queen represents Britain. She represents the people, right? So like, the royal family is a representation of the British people. So calling the monarchy racist is, in fact, calling the people of Britain racist, because that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to stand up for, or like stand in for the people. And it's like, yeah. I remember like Avenue Q, that show on Broadway, is like, everyone's a little bit racist, you know? But that's like that individual level thing. But think on an institutional level, right? Of course Britain is racist. Like, it was a poor country, you know, until they started like making people work for free for them. I'm sorry, like, the whole like structure of Britain in and of itself is racist. It had to be, because like, otherwise you guys would not have been developed, you know, or any country in Europe for that matter. It wouldn't have, you know, become the rich, powerful countries that they became if it had not been for stealing land from other people and, you know, making people work for you for free for how many hundreds of years. Like, it's easy to be rich, like, if you make somebody work for you for free. But I mean, nobody wants to think about themselves in negative terms, because it's a people thing. It's only when we do that work that we can like make the world a better place.
Yeah. Is that how we're signing off?
Yeah, I think that's how we're signing off. Let's make the world a better place. Let's recognize our own racism and our own, how we are implicated in racist institutions.
A black handshake, a white handshake.
Thanks for watching.